My name is Mimi Dietderich, and if I could be any animal, I would be a barn owl, just because they're majestic creatures.
This is Pawprint, an animal rescue community. Episode 20. I'm Harold Ree.
And I'm Nancy Ree.
Today's guest is the talented Mimi Dietderich.
She is the foster coordinator for the East Bay SPCA. I got to know Mimi when we started fostering dogs through the East Bay SPCA. I just really liked her positive spirit. She was just so helpful with any questions we had.
If you've listened to our intro episode 000, you know that the first rescue that we adopted, Allie, was from the East Bay SPCA in Oakland. They also have a sister location in Dublin, California. Go to eastbayspca.org. You can find the show notes for today's episode with Mimi Dietderich at thisispawprint.com/20. That's the number 20.
It'll be 4 years in December since I've joined the East Bay SPCA. I first started as an animal care associate, so it was essentially a kennel attendant that did a lot of cleaning, laundry, feeding, maintenance of the animals, areas. I became an animal care coordinator. I was doing adoption talks, going on transfers, processing strays, assisting with owner surrenders. I was also helping out with some of the medical animals, medicating and assisting with vet rounds. I was also starting to help out with the foster program very slightly at that time. So basically at that point, I was just writing posts for animals and assisting with a few pickups and drop-offs. Now I work with my boss, Joseph Romero, who's the foster care manager, and basically we just get out all of the underage animals, the medical cases, the behavior cases, and then we'll coordinate that and just make sure that everything is on the up and up in the foster homes, make sure they have what they need. I've pretty much known that I wanted to work with animals since I was a little kid. I think I dabbled in a couple of other ideas, but it always come back to working in the animal field in one method or another. Once I graduated college, I was volunteering. Well, I was working in a lab that was studying communication and mate choice selection in jumping spiders. The grant money went south, and because I had already graduated, I was more expensive to keep than some of the other interns or the grad students. I started looking for work up here, and there was an open position at the East Bay SPCA.
What kind of spiders are these, and why did you study them?
So I can't remember their scientific name, but they're jumping spiders. And the professor at UC Berkeley, Professor Damian Elias, he discovered that during their mate selection, they actually have some form of, it's a communication, so it's not just visual cues where they'll kind of dance. We found out that they also give off a vibration, so they actually speak to each other. So we were basically taking different subspecies and putting them together and seeing if the females had a preference for their subspecies or what they were looking for, and we were able to record the entire sequence of the kind of mating dance for these spiders.
You had me at jumping spiders, so anyways.
I really like that a lot.
Right. But what's a typical day in your life?
I'm still running around the shelter a lot, but it's a lot of emails back and forth.
So roughly how many fosters do you have currently?
It's really hard to say because there are some fosters that maybe will only take an animal once a year. And then there's some fosters who are still active, but maybe haven't fostered for maybe 2 years. And then I also have fosters that will drop off and pick up on the same day, and we'll keep doing that for months. Right. So active fosters, in that they've probably fostered within the year, I would probably say a couple hundred. Wow. I feel like there's kind of a couple of regulars that come in very frequently. It depends, though. I mean, the fosters that we have going out are kind of biased in themselves. I mean, the highest volume of animals we have going out are underage kittens. So if you're a foster who would like to work with dogs or puppies, you're not going to foster as much just because I'm not going to have as high of a frequency of those animals coming in. Gotcha. But then I also have fosters that will be more seasonal. So I have, I know our bottle baby fosters who in the spring will be very active, but then when fall and winter comes around, maybe they'll foster older kittens or puppies every now and again, but they'll kind of have their downtime until spring comes up again. If I ever have any medical cases, I know there's some fosters, like Nancy, I know for you, whenever we had an animal that came in with a broken leg, I was kind of expecting that you were one of the few people who would respond, and you usually were. So depending on what type of fosters we have come in, I can usually anticipate certain people who will likely be interested in that animal.
So are those the hardest cases to find fosters for, is the injured animals?
It depends on their age as well. If I have an animal with a broken leg or a broken pelvis, it's going to be harder to get them into foster just because it's going to be potentially 12 weeks until they're medically cleared. This animal is going to have medication. They're going to need to come in regularly for x-rays, bandage changes, splint changes. This animal might be a little bit more difficult to foster just because it's going to have higher energy because it's on cage rest. And then it depends on the size of the animal. If it's a 8-pound Chihuahua, it's going to be a lot easier to find them a foster versus if it's a 60-pound German Shepherd. So the size is a big change as well. We've noticed that there's a lot more smaller animals coming into shelters, but I think it's also because a lot more people live in smaller homes or don't necessarily have larger backyards. So whenever we have a large adult dog come in that needs fostering, it's going to take me a little bit longer to find a home for them.
What do you think it takes to actually be a good foster?
Patience, a lot of patience. Even if it's an animal that doesn't have any medical or behavior problems and it's just an animal that needs 2 more weeks until it's of age to go to spay and neuter. If you have puppies, they're probably going to cry the first night, maybe the first 2 nights. Any animal that goes into your home is going to be a little bit more frightened. It's a change. They're not used to their surroundings. There's new sounds and new smells. Maybe it's a home that has other animals in it. So it's a big adjustment period for them as well. So I think the first few days it's always a little bit difficult, but everything always seems to go out a little bit easier as the days go on with them.
So is there a certain demographic in your fosters, or is it just pretty widespread? Is it usually families?
It's all across the board. Just thinking of the applications that we receive, there's people who rent, there's people who own homes, new families, retired individuals, people who are self-employed, people who work full-time. My fosters are in all different types of professions. I've had photographers, lawyers, doctors, pediatricians, people who are working on their own startups. We have, I'd say, a fair amount of younger people, maybe college age, that either are renting or living in their own home, and then them and their roommates have fostered, or they live with their family and are going to college. So it's all across the board. I have a lot of people over the last few months that I haven't heard from for quite some time, maybe 2 or 3 years, reach out and want to start fostering again. So for some of them, maybe that year specifically, they were just going through a lot of life changes, weddings, celebrations, kids going to college, kids finishing their senior year in high school. And then things kind of get a little bit quieter, so they start up again.
What does it take to become a foster for the East Bay SPCA? Do you have to attend an orientation, get trained?
So online at our website, there is a link for an online application, and then it has a list of all of our upcoming orientations. All you have to do is fill out the online application. You attend one of the orientations, which is about 75 to 90 minutes. After that, I will connect all of our fosters to our blog, and then they'll start receiving posts on our animals, and they can start fostering as soon or as late as they'd like.
We've been fostering, Harold and I and our son. So we as a family have been fostering this is the 4th year. We fostered about 50. What would you tell those people who have a desire to foster, but they just feel like they couldn't let go of their foster animals?
I feel like a lot of the fosters for their first animal or their first litter is always the hardest, but the more that they foster, the easier it gets, especially. They know that they're doing a great thing for these animals. They know that they're going to be finding their future homes. And I've had a couple of fosters who have fallen in love with maybe their first foster and have really considered adopting them, but wanted to keep fostering instead. So they brought back their first foster and kept fostering with us for, I think it's been maybe a year or 2 for that specific case that I can recall. And I think since then they have actually adopted a dog, but they are continuing to foster. But I feel like the first one's always the hardest. It definitely gets easier with time because you're going to see that more animals keep coming through. It's not as sporadic as a lot of people would think, especially with kittens. Kitten season is going to last from April, May until the middle of August, and then there's going to be a little dip, and then in the fall we're going to have another spike. I've seen kitten seasons that seem to last the entire year.
Has that been the case this year because it's been so hot?
It's definitely gotten slower. It's really hard to say. There's so many things that could affect the number of animals coming into our care. But within the last few weeks, we have been seeing mothers with infants. We've still been having bottle babies coming into our care. And I'm sure if we're seeing them, then all of the city shelters are seeing them as well.
Why do we have such an overpopulation, which forces organizations like the East Bay SPCA to actually create these foster networks?
Honestly, it's just because there's a lot of animals that aren't spayed and neutered, especially, cats, if they're indoor, outdoor. Sometimes, a cat will go out and it comes back, and next thing you know, there's kittens. That being said, if you do ever find infant kittens, before you collect them, please just make sure that the mother is not around. Mother cats will leave their young to hunt. They move their litters multiple times a day sometimes to move them into a safer location. So if you find a group of kittens that are left unattended, it doesn't necessarily mean that mom's not there. Mm-hmm. And their best chance at life is with their mom.
Puppy mills or families simply just abandoning their pets, other issues that contribute to overpopulation. What have you seen?
I know that some states have very high regulations of puppy mills. Other ones have much more lenient ones, and then other states do not permit them at all. But as far as what I've seen animals that are very likely purebreds, and very likely there's something wrong with it. Usually if it's perfectly healthy and fine, then whoever had them are able to sell them or find a home for them. People just aren't fully educated on certain things, so or don't have the funds or don't know the resources that are out there. So I know us specifically, we have our Pit Fix program. There's cheaper spay and neutering for Chihuahuas and Pit Bulls in the areas. And a lot of people don't know about that, so they won't go and have their animals fixed. And then they have maybe a couple of puppies and they're not sure what to do with them, and they themselves aren't able to take care of them, and they honestly just want the best thing for those animals. I feel like a lot of the problems, the result of poor education to the communities.
Any stories that have touched you in your work?
Recently we had a dog named Tofu and Miso. Miso and Tofu came into the shelter. They were both
Oh, by the way, who names the animals?
The staff does.
Okay, because they have fun with it. I would love to have that job to name the animals.
Honestly, after a while, it gets a little exhausting because you kind of start to run out of ideas.
Yeah.
And then depending on the litter size, it gets a little difficult.
Yeah. We picked up some animals who were named after all the Oakland A's players, and after a while, you kind of run out of
also school supplies like protractor.
There's a couple of running themes that always come back. Greek and Roman gods are a constant.
Yeah. Harry Potter.
I feel like Game of Thrones has shown up maybe 3 or 4 times that I can remember. That's been a very popular one. Yeah. But Miso and Tofu came in, and they were both extremely emaciated, and they both had extreme eye issues. Unfortunately,
These were dogs.
These were dogs, English bulldogs. Okay. And unfortunately, Tofu didn't make it, but Miso had to have cherry eye surgery multiple times. She was having a lot of eye issues, very common to her breed. She was fostered for a very long time, and then her fosters ended up adopting her, but every time she'd come in, all the volunteers and all the staff members would see her walking down the hall, and they'd get really excited, and they would want to take Tofu, or they'd want to take Miso out and visit with her. And as soon as she was back in, everyone would know that Miso was back for a visit. Really? So everyone loved her. But she wasn't there for very long. As soon as she was medically cleared, she was adopted that day. And I guess she goes out on camping trips all the time now with the family. I don't fall in love with animals very often because they come all the time, and it just would make me go insane. Yeah. There was a dog that came in whose name was originally Frankie. It was a white Chihuahua. He came into the clinic and he was having a lot of medical problems. It turns out he had eaten a towel. or at least parts of a towel. So he had a lot of foreign objects stuck in his intestines and his stomach. We did the surgery. Everything worked out fine. And then at that time, I was helping with medications over the weekend, so I was the first one to medicate him. The next day, I really fell in love with him. He would just come up to me. I would give him his medication. I would sit with him for a little bit, and I had to make sure that he wasn't vomiting or having any problems, because with the surgery that he had, we wanted to make sure that everything was okay. He was a trouble child. He was very picky. He didn't really like a whole lot of people. And finally, one of the volunteers really started to warm up to him a lot more, and he just kind of took off from there, and he loved everyone. And he was with us for a really long time, and he ended up going to the Dublin facility, and he was housed with this little dog named Mabel. A couple came in, and they were going to adopt Mabel. One of the staff members who was doing the adoption said, like, oh, Mabel does really great with dogs. You know, this is her roommate, who I think at the time was named Poncho. And
so Frankie became Poncho.
Frankie became Poncho. They said that they weren't opposed to taking 2 dogs home, and so they adopted them both. Aww. And they ended up sending us a really cute picture of both of them sitting down on the couch together sleeping, so that's on my locker right now. Aww. But I was very close to adopting that little dog.
So how many pets do you have right now?
I personally don't have any, but my housemates have 2 dogs. They have a little Chihuahua and a pug.
So tell us a little bit about your history with animals growing up.
I had a dog growing up. She was a pug Queensland Heeler mix, and the oddest looking dog that you would have ever seen. Besides that, she was our only pet. I grew up in a small town called Cambria, and it's kind of a little small town, kind of in a forest right next to the ocean. In that area, we'd see all types of birds of prey, and there'd be mountain lions and coyotes and bobcats, and the whales would come down during the season. So it was just an area where you'd see a lot of wildlife all the time, and I think that's what really got me interested in animals. It's kind of just gone from there.
Taking classes in high school or college, did you do anything that was specific to animals?
I essentially wanted to go for a zoology major, but when I got into UC Berkeley, the closest thing that I could find was molecular environmental biology. And then my concentration was animal health and behavior. So I took a lot of ecology classes, a lot of wildlife classes, not a lot of anatomy classes, but more kind of geared to ecosystems and relationships between animals, and kind of more of like their behaviors specifically.
When you look at the way animal rescue is set up in your neck of the woods, what do you think really works, and what do you think are things that we can improve?
For us, we have a lot of programs for younger children, and they can do animal camp where they learn about sheltering and about what we do, but they also learn about, you know, how to care for animals and animals' needs. So, you know, those kids end up becoming ambassadors in their community, and then word kind of spreads very quickly. I think it's something that needs to start pretty early, or at least information about resources and tools that are available need to be easily accessible to the public, because otherwise they just don't know about them. And a lot of those programs would be some things that would be able to keep animals in homes that love them, or would be able to help problems like overpopulation. If people knew more, a lot of organizations do offer programs to help get your animal fixed at a lower cost. Things would be a lot easier.
What advice would you give to folks who want to enter into the field of whether it's animal rescue or, I don't know, becoming a vet?
I would say to volunteer. When I was in high school, I volunteered at a very small animal shelter in my town, which was primarily just took cats, because we don't really have stray dogs. In my hometown, we have more cats. I think maybe they'd have 1 dog every now and again. But I started volunteering there in high school, and I think that definitely helped me get my first position at the shelter. It was, you know, the base entry position, but I already knew what to expect. I already knew that I was going to be doing a lot of dishes. I was going to be doing a lot of mopping. I was going to be doing a lot of cleaning. And I kind of was already prepared for that. So I think that definitely helped me get my foot in the door. And then right now, I'm still would like to get into a more wildlife field, but same thing, you need to volunteer. So I'm volunteering every Friday in the mornings at the Lindsay Wildlife Center at the hospital, and then on Saturday mornings I've been volunteering at the Oakland Zoo. So I'm hoping that with more hands-on experience, I'll be able to get ahead of some people for future positions one day.
Sure.
And by doing that, I've gotten more training on raptor handling. So now I can actually handle the hawks and the owls at Lindsay. At the Oakland Zoo, I work on the string that has the river otters and the bats. So I have my pre-exposure rabies vaccines already. So I'm gaining a lot of experience with a lot of species I've never had any experience before. I had no experience with birds before helping out with the Lindsay. And it's mainly birds that come in. A lot of songbirds, a lot of raptors, but then we also get opossums, raccoons, the occasional seabird. Start to volunteer. No matter just anything that you're interested in, that's a great way to get your foot in the door. And then if you treat it like a working interview, at least with us, I know that we've had several interns and volunteers who have been working with us at the East Bay SPCA, and then some of them have applied to entry-level positions with us, and the staff just has glowing reviews about them, and they already know the ropes. They know how to do certain things already, and the staff, the supervisor, have already seen them work and know how serious they are about that. So it's a great way to help out.
Have you seen issues of burnout or?
All the time.
Right.
All the time. Compassion fatigue is something that we're constantly working with. We're actually, since I've been here, I've already sat through 2 compassion workshops. It's usually a day-long event. Every time they try to get a different instructor so that we can kind of get a different perspective, a different view, different experiences with it. We actually have another one coming up for the staff in the next month. So we have a lot of new staff right now, so this is going to be their first compassion fatigue workshop. Being there as long as I have definitely gone through burnout. I've definitely gotten to the point where I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to keep doing my job. Wasn't sure if being in the shelter was maybe the right course for me. And I'm finally learned that I was going through compassion fatigue. I learned how to better manage that, which is different for everyone. But I think that since I started doing more of my volunteer work in the wildlife, I think that's definitely helped me a lot more. And then just also making sure that I do take a lot of time for myself, visit with my friends, just have some alone time and just kind of not thinking about work. And I think that definitely helps out a lot. But it's taken a long time to get to the point where I am, for sure.
Yeah. So you named one, giving time to yourself. What other sort of keys are there to dealing with compassion fatigue and burnout?
Well, I know for sure one of the things I'm doing is actually one of the things that's not recommended. So they recommend to care fields if you're in nursing or medicine, or if you're in animal sheltering. You are more likely to be one of those people who's going to be caring for others in other aspects of your life as well. Well, I ended up choosing to volunteer by caring for these birds and these bats and other animals that are coming into these other facilities. But for me, that's something that I'm very interested in. I think some of the things that they recommended were to get exercise, get plenty of sleep, visit with family and friends, do things that you're interested in, get back into your hobbies, things like that. Just things that should be really easy to think about, but when you're kind of in the middle of it, you just don't even realize what's happening. So everything seems totally fine. And then it gets to the point where you realize you're totally burnt out.
I know that in my case, when we foster dogs, and nowadays, I've gone to the county shelter directly to pull dogs. There's so many there.
Yeah.
And you just wonder, gosh, is this just a drop in the bucket? There's so many out there. So I keep trying to remind myself, I do what I can. If there's an animal that I can rescue, I can do something about.
Exactly.
And the others, you need to have a higher faith, or faith in a higher being, or that.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, it is overwhelming.
I think there's multiple stages, but one of them is realizing that you can't do everything. And for a lot of people, that's very difficult to admit. And then just the types of cases that come in can be very overwhelming to see on a daily basis. So certain shelters and certain organizations are going to see higher volumes. So depending on where you are, it might vary on how quickly something like this takes effect. But I think all organizations and everyone working in these types of fields are definitely at high risk for experiencing things like this, for sure.
I guess drinking copious amounts of alcohol is not a way to deal
Not
with
recommended.
compassion fatigue.
Not recommended.
Right.
I think some of the things that they strongly recommend against, which are a lot of coping mechanisms for a lot of people, and some people you don't even realize that you're doing it. Alcohol is one. Drugs and alcohol is definitely something that you don't want to get into. But something as simple as like junk food, eating junk food a lot. Some people will cope with shopping or things like that, which, in moderation is not all these things in moderation, aside from the drugs, are, not necessarily a bad thing. But you don't realize at what volume you're doing these things or you're ingesting like junk food. Because I know, at least for me, I am not good about waking up early to make my own lunch. And so I feel like since I've started working, I have definitely eaten a lot more junk food than before. But at the same time, when I first started working, I lost like 10 pounds in the first 3 months just because of the high volume of activity I was doing. So I'm a lot less active now, so I have to keep an eye on that. But it's really hard to pull out of things like that. So definitely just take care of yourself.
For folks who want to either volunteer, foster, find you or East Bay SPCA, what are the best ways for folks to either look up East Bay SPCA or look you up?
Probably look up the East Bay SPCA, because if you are interested in fostering, and as soon as you fill out your application, then that's going to go straight to my email. And then we'll be in contact with you.
You also supply all the food, any medical
issues
attention,
or bills.
necessary vaccinations.
Pretty
spay,
much
neuter,
with any
surgery,
foster,
right.
You're going to be going home with, at least for us, all foster programs are different for different organizations, but for us, I'm going to supply you with their food, crate, some bedding. If you are taking home cats or kittens and you need a litter box and litter, I'd be more than happy to send that home with you. If there is something that you feel that you need and it's not something that I've mentioned, then I know I've had some fosters who've asked to use shorter bowls for their animals because they were very young and they just had taller bowls. So I mean, that's something that I can loan out for you.
Or X-Pens
toys, X-Pens and X-Crates. Yeah, they're a little bit more difficult to acquire because a lot of people want them, and unfortunately, I only have a few. But
sometimes they don't come back.
Yeah, it's a very high value item. And then if your animal is very small, so like our bottle feeding fosters, I'm going to send you home with kitten meal replacement or puppy meal replacement, which would just be KMR or Espalac, bottles, warming discs, bedding, pretty much anything that you need we will provide.
And then any kind of medical needs will be taken care of at the East Bay SPCA clinic.
The vast majority of the cases, if there's any problem, they just come back to me. A vet will take a look at them. We'll provide any medication needed. I will let you know when the animal's due for vaccines so they can come in and receive those. And then when the time comes, they'll come back to us and we'll send them to spay and neuter.
For puppies and kittens, what's the average length of fostering? For adult dogs and cats, what's the average length?
For puppies and kittens, it depends on how old they are when they come in. So they won't be able to go to spay and neuter until they're 2 months old and 2 pounds. That's a legal and a safety requirement. So the legal is the 2 months and then the safety requirement is the 2 pounds. So they need to.
All? I thought they had to weigh a lot more than that.
No, a lot of people are actually
2 pounds?
surprised how small they can be. There have been some animals I remember a specific little apple-headed Chihuahua that probably is never going to be 2 pounds in his adult life. I think he got to be 1.9 or something like that, and he wasn't getting any bigger, and he was maybe 3 months at that point. So he went to our full service clinic so he could be very closely monitored and under anesthesia, and everything went fine. For dogs and puppies, it's pretty much the same thing. Puppies go over 2 pounds almost instantly. Kittens pretty much will be 2 pounds once they're 2 months old. But I would say that the average length of stay would probably be 2 to 3 weeks for kittens. And then for adult dogs and like adult cats, it's probably going to be a little bit longer. Sometimes we'll have animals that need to go into a foster home just to kind of get a break, especially if it's maybe a cat that was a known or surrender and is just not really adjusting to the shelter life. So maybe he or she will be out for 2 weeks just to kind of see how he does. But a lot of the adult animals, the reasons that they would go into foster would likely be more behavior or medical related. So they'll probably be out for a little bit longer than that.
If you could wave a magic wand and solve a pervasive problem in animal rescue, what would it be?
Probably just that the volume and like the number of animals coming into the shelters wouldn't exist. So just that the overpopulation problem would just magically be solved. It's definitely a lot better than it was maybe 20 or 30 years ago, but it is still a constant problem. There's a lot of pets and there's not as many homes.
We want to say thank you to Mimi Dietderich for sharing her story and for doing a wonderful job of coordinating fosters at the East Bay SPCA. If you want to learn more about this episode, go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/20. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Look for This Is Pawprint, one word. If you want to listen to more episodes, you can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher, along with Podcast Addict on Android phones. We want to say thank you to all of you, our listeners out there, for sharing your stories. And we want to welcome our listeners in Little Rock, Arkansas, Memphis, Tennessee, and in Europe, Warsaw, Poland. You make a difference by spreading a positive message of love and peace by saving an animal. Have a great day, everyone, and see you next time on Paw Print.
Paw Print is a production of EVER Education.
You can't handle the truth.
Woohoo!